Today, we're going to be talking about this upcoming summit that President Trump has laid on with Vladimir Putin. Now, all belief is that this summit is going to take place in Alaska. However, President Trump twice today in a press conference misspoke and said that he was going to Russia to meet with Vladimir Putin when actually he's going to Alaska. Actually got some Russians pretty excited because as Alaska used to belong to Russia, a lot of people in Russia would love to see Alaska become part of Russia again. As a matter of fact, this is something from Preston Stewart's YouTube channel that he pointed out. A patch going around Russian military units. It's got a picture of Russia and Alaska over there on the right. And this Russian language on here says, "We'll take it all." I'd say, bring it. Good luck. Not going to happen. But how would you feel if we were in a conflict with Russia and President Trump decided, I tell you what, Russia, if you'll stop invading us, if you'll stop killing people in America, we'll just give you Alaska. That is essentially what President Trump is talking about doing with Ukraine. Russia has been attacking Ukraine for 3 years. Just recently, over the last couple of days, there are some rumors going around that Russia has broken through the lines in Ukraine. Suffice it to say that Russia has not made huge gains in Ukraine in the last couple of years, and they have lost a profane amount of soldiers and equipment trying to take over more of Ukraine. Now, they are probably ramping up right now the attacks on Ukraine for two reasons. First of all, we're getting to be the end of the summer. They've got a couple of months left before it starts getting real cold in Ukraine. And the fall season in Ukraine is mud season. And it's just super muddy. It's rainy. Even still, right now, they're not able to travel off the roads a whole lot. And Ukraine is holding its own because they have really put a ton of effort and resources into their drone corps. And they've got a drone corps now that is the envy of the world, really. They've gone now to these motorcycle attacks. So if they put everybody in one vehicle, then it takes one drone to take out one vehicle, and boom, and you kill all the guys in the vehicle, and that's it. Or if that vehicle hits a mine or whatever. But if you got a bunch of guys on motorcycles, then it takes a separate drone to hit each motorcycle. So it takes a lot more resources on the part of Ukraine. Plus, the motorcycles can go around some of the landmines. Those landmines they put out in the road are about the size of a dinner plate, and they're about that thick, and they have a pressure plate on top. So you drive over it and it goes off. And they just would lay those out across the road. If you're on a motorcycle, you can more easily miss those things. So that's their new tactic, is motorcycle assaults. But the problem is you can get where you're going very quickly, but when you do, how are you going to supply those guys? They don't even plan for that. Russia makes like almost no plans to support their troops if they do happen to break through the lines and get in further into Ukraine. I want to play for you a video of President Trump in a press conference he gave today. I'm going to play you just a few sound bites from what he had to say. Take a listen.
I'm going to go and see the parameters. Now, I may leave and say, good luck, and that'll be the end. I may say this is not going to be settled. There are those that believe that Putin wanted all of Ukraine. I happen to be one of them, by the way. I think if it weren't for me, he would not be even talking to anybody else right now. But I'm going to meet with him. We're going to see what the parameters are. I'm then going to call up President Zelensky and the European leaders, and I'm going to tell them what kind of a deal. I'm not going to make a deal. It's not up to me to make a deal. I think a deal should be made for both. I think Russia has to get back into building their country. It's a massive country. I think they have 11 time zones, if you can believe. But I got a call that they'd like to meet, and I'm going to see what they want to meet about. I'd like to see a ceasefire. I'd like to see the best deal that could be made for both parties. It takes two to tango.
He's saying he wants an outcome that's fair for both parties. My question is, why should Russia get a fair shake? Because Russia started this war. Russia has been prosecuting this war. The war didn't have to happen. Unfortunately, later in this press briefing, President Trump insinuated that it was President Zelensky's fault. How do you make that case? That Zelensky was responsible for starting this war? Look, I saw Zelensky 2 days before the war started and interviewed him. And I can tell you, he didn't think the war was about to start. He was telling his people, look, Russia does this from time to time. They build up forces on the border, they do training exercises, and they try to threaten us and everything. And the place where I interviewed him at was at a training event for first responders, how to respond to riots, fires, unrest, things like that, because they were expecting that Russia would send agents provocateurs into their country to try to stir up unrest. That's more of what he was expecting before the war started. Could anybody try to make the case that Zelensky was happy and that was what he wanted? It just doesn't stand to reason. President Trump was complaining a little bit about the fact that President Zelensky does not have the power to cede territory of Ukraine to an enemy. He doesn't have a power to make that kind of deal. That sort of power is not vested in the presidency via the Constitution of Ukraine. And I have to say that makes sense, especially if you live next to Russia and Russia has a history of influencing your political parties and actually has had Putin puppets serving as president of Ukraine before. It would be a good thing that they would put that into the Constitution. President Zelensky has said, look, we're very tired of war. We realize that we're going to have some kind of negotiated settlement. Our economy is in shambles. Our cities are being bombed every single night. We're losing civilians. Putin is killing civilians every day in Ukraine. And so about 80+% of the people in Ukraine would like to see the war end through some sort of negotiated settlement. And if there's going to be a negotiated settlement, Putin is going to demand to be able to keep parts of Ukraine. Now, I have to caveat all this by saying I don't think Putin is serious at all in any way, shape, or form about negotiating a peace deal. I think President Putin is playing President Trump like a fiddle because President Trump got mad at Putin when, of all people, his wife pointed out that Putin was bombing old folks' homes and maternity hospitals. Trump acted like that was news to him. What? That he actually said that. He said, yeah, my wife told me he's bombing old folks' homes every other day. And I said, what? That's a direct quote from President Trump. So it makes me wonder, what are his advisors telling him about Ukraine? Or are they telling him anything? Because anybody who followed the news even a little bit in Ukraine knows that Putin is bombing civilian targets, schools, hospitals, churches on a daily basis in Ukraine and has been for years. So for President Trump to act like he's surprised by that is very disconcerting to me because that's something that the leader of the free world ought to know. And it's not like the information isn't out there. It should be pretty easy for him to get that information. So if he has to get it from his wife, we got a problem, folks. So anyway, he got mad when he found that out. And so he decided, okay, we're going to slap tariffs on Russia, not just on Russia, but on countries that do business with Russia that are helping pay Russia's bills. Now, if he was serious about that, now, first of all, that's a great idea. And kudos to President Trump for putting tariffs and secondary tariffs on people who do business with Russia so that they can squeeze the Russian economy that much more. That is the one thing that Putin fears. However, if President Trump was serious about that, then some of those sanctions would be slapped on Europe as well, because Europe continues to buy oil from Russia. And some of those, instead of just hitting India and China, who are the two biggest purchasers of Russian oil now, he should be hitting Azerbaijan because Azerbaijan is buying Russian oil and then reselling it to Europe. He should be slapping tariffs on every single thing that comes or goes out of Russia, including semiconductors and especially semiconductors, really, because they need some of those to build the weapons that they're bombing Ukraine with. Look, every time the price of oil goes down $1, that affects the income stream of the government of Russia by about 4%. So if you can imagine, if President Trump went all in, the full Monty on lowering oil prices, pump as much oil and gas as we can here in the United States, and encourage OPEC to raise their production and do everything we can to absolutely stifle the price of oil, even for just a short term. Number one, it's going to make everything cheaper for you and me. That's good. But number two, if you make the price of oil go down $10 a barrel, that's a 40% decline in the income stream of the government of Russia. Anyway, President Trump was complaining that President Zelensky has to get a referendum in order to change the constitution of Ukraine so that they can negotiate and give up sovereign Ukrainian territory. And it's not, that's Zelensky's fault. That was in the Constitution before Zelensky became president. Zelensky didn't write that. So President Trump said, hey, you're going to have to give up some land. And Zelensky's, I can't. I have to have a referendum in order to do that. And President Trump was upset by that. So in this same press briefing, he said, I'm kind of upset with Zelensky. He says he needs permission to trade away some of his land. He didn't need permission to start the war, and he had no problem killing all these people in the war. It's not Zelensky's fault. Zelensky did not start this war. The Ukrainians not only didn't want a war with Russia, they didn't have that much of a problem with Russia in the areas of the Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts before the war. A lot of people there spoke Russian. A lot of them still have family in Russia. Russia has committed something like 40,000 documented and proven war crimes. They continue to use banned poison gas on the front lines. They've kidnapped hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian children who were not orphans, by the way, kidnapped them, either killed or just separated them from their parents, and then placed them as foster children with families all over Russia. Tell them, okay, you're Russian now. Some of those Ukrainian kids are now being sent to the front lines to fight their own countrymen. So that's enough about that. Let's go on to more of what President Trump said.
Ultimately, I'll have a meeting next week. I had a great relationship with him, considering the fact that I was not nice to him because of the pipeline. I ended the pipeline.
What's he talking about there? Which pipeline did he end? Is he saying that he ended the Nord Stream pipeline? That solves a mystery because everybody's been trying to figure out who blew it up. I guess it was President Trump that blew it up. I don't know what other pipeline he's talking about there.
I also gave the javelins. Do you ever hear of a javelin?
Do you ever hear of a javelin?
But I'm going to meet with President Putin, and we're going to see what he has in mind. And if it's a fair deal, I'll reveal it to the European Union leaders and to the NATO leaders, and also to President Zelensky. I think out of respect, I'll call him first.
That's nice of him to say. Now, he said before, look, it's not up to me to make a deal. I'm not the one that makes a deal. I'm not there to make a deal. Okay, so what are you there for? And it's true. President Trump cannot make a deal to end this war. So why is he meeting with Vladimir Putin? At the end of this, he says he'll know within the first couple of minutes whether or not a deal will be made. And that's right after he said that he couldn't make a deal. So I'm not sure what he exactly means by that. Take a listen.
And then I'll call them after. And I may say, lots of luck, keep fighting. Or I may say, we can make a deal. If not, I will tell you this, I've seen...
Wait, we can make a deal. Now we can make a deal. He was saying before he can't make a deal, that the deal has to be between Zelensky and Putin. Now he's saying we can make a deal. I just don't know what he's talking about. He's a deal maker, but it's not up to him. This is not something that President Trump has any sway over, really, except for against Ukraine. And again, just like we saw President Biden saying, oh, we support Israel, but then he would go behind Israel's back and give money to the Palestinian Authority or say or do things that supported the Palestinian cause and Hamas, like we need a two-state solution, stuff like that. And he would hold up aid to Israel. And we all roundly criticized President Biden for doing that. That's exactly what President Trump is doing to Ukraine, because as it turns out, if there are two parties that have to make a deal and you're trying to get them together, and one of those two parties is completely unreasonable, won't listen to reason, won't make any concessions whatsoever, and their whole thing is, yeah, we'll make a deal. The deal is we win, you lose. That's his position. Not much is going to happen there. The only leverage you're going to be able to bring to bear is not going to be where it needs to be on the aggressor, it's going to be on the victim. And that's what President Trump seems to be doing. He seems to be attacking the victim once again.
Coming out of Ukraine, 88% of the people would like to see a deal made. And if you go back 3 years, everybody was gung-ho for war. Everybody's gung-ho for war until you have it.
Just to follow up on what you were saying there. First of all, Volodymyr Zelensky is not invited on Friday?
He wasn't a part of it. I would say he could go, but he's gone to a lot of meetings. He's been there for 3.5 years, nothing happened.
And what is the definition?
And you want somebody that's been doing this for 3.5 years? What's it?
So again, it seems like he's blaming Zelensky for the war not ending. What does he expect Zelensky to do? Surrender? That's what it sounds like. Huh. He's been fighting for 3.5 years, just killing people as if he's doing it for no reason, as if the Ukrainians are not fighting for their very survival. What else is Ukraine fighting for than the survival of their country, the literal survival of Ukraine, the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian language? Because if Russia takes over Ukraine, there won't be any Ukrainian language anymore. The last time they controlled Ukraine, they outlawed the Ukrainian language. All of the cities and streets and everything got renamed with Russian names. That will happen again if Russia takes over Ukraine. Now, again, I hate to be critical of President Trump, but he's just not making sense here. Let's finish.
Definition of a good deal, I'll tell you after I hear what the deal is. We're going to have a meeting with Vladimir Putin, and at the end of that meeting, probably in the first 2 minutes, I'll know exactly whether or not a deal can be made.
How will you know that?
I think that he's going to find out after a couple of minutes with Vladimir Putin that no deal can be made. Because according to intelligence reports from the battlefield on the front lines of Ukraine, Russia is not taking steps that are commensurate with somebody who's anticipating a peace deal. He is mobilizing more forces. He's strengthening his units on the front lines. He's increasing the number of attacks against Ukraine. He's pushing his troops forward in almost a desperate gambit to take over more territory, probably as a negotiating tactic. We see this whenever President Trump talks of a peace deal, trying to force a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia. What happens is Russia steps up its attacks on Ukrainian civilians, throws tens of thousands of more troops into the front lines to try to cement some gains so that when they come to the negotiating table, if they come to the negotiating table, they will be able to say, okay, if the deal is we keep what we've already got, we just got a bunch more because we pushed real hard and took it over in the last minute. I can promise you, President Putin has no interest whatsoever in a peace deal. There are a myriad number of reasons why he shouldn't be interested, or he should just stop fighting and leave is what he should do. But that's not likely to happen, because if he does leave, if he pulls his troops out of Russia, the Russian economy will collapse. And really, that's what it's going to take to end this war, is the collapse of the Russian economy. The Russian president has no problem sacrificing millions of his countrymen for his delusions of grandeur. No problem whatsoever. And he will continue to throw tens of thousands of men into the breach and get them killed he probably sleeps like a baby at night. Doesn't bother him one bit. That's just the price of doing business, because he grew up in the Soviet Union. And the whole mindset of the Soviet Union was that you as a person don't matter. The only thing that matters is the state. And so if you have to die to serve the state, so be it. Putin is not going to agree to anything with President Trump. He can't. Not only does President Trump not have anything to offer, except if you stop fighting, we will lift the sanctions on you. You would think if you were talking to a reasonable actor, that position would make sense. That would be a good negotiating tactic. Okay, we will bolster your economy if you stop killing your neighbors. That would make a lot of sense. The thing is, Vladimir Putin is not a rational actor. The President Trump that I watched in that press briefing tonight looks to me like a guy who has no flipping idea what's going on. I don't know what he thinks he can accomplish by meeting with President Putin, but I'm here to tell you, take this to the bank. Hold me to this. Nothing positive for Ukraine is going to come out of a meeting between President Trump and President Putin. It's just not going to happen.